Hi, I wanted to talk about woody notes and fragrances. As talking about the woody notes, this is a rather vast and wide topic because in fragrances, different tree, branch, and other plant notes could be considered more or less a woody note. And for example, a patchouli note is more or less considered a woody note, even though technically it is a plant. And also, under the woody notes, we could also place mosses and similar plants, sometimes fougères, as it is more on the woody or fragrance profile rather than plant profile, but of course it really depends on the specific categories and categorization of these specific plants. And also sometimes on the way of processing of the specific wood. For example, the dry wood could also be considered more or less a specific separate note, of course, similarly to as Fragrantica portal notes. But overall, one of the most well-known woody note is the wood or agarwood fragrance note. Of course, you could distinctly note specific separate woody fragrance notes under the oud note, because the location of oud growing could also vary the specific scent profile, the specific woody oud note. And same way as for agarwood or oud note, the location is very important also for sandalwood, the quality of the plant, well, in this case tree, as well as the processing, for example, the drying process, and other various nuances would be something that would determine the value of the specific ingredient and also the scent profile affiliated with it. For example, an oud fragrance is one of the most expensive ones ingredient wise. Thus a natural oud fragrance itself would be more or less on the niche side, or it would be replaced by synthetic alternatives. But other more interesting woody fragrances would be, for example, palisander rosewood fragrance note, Goyak wood fragrance note, one of my favorites, which is cedar note. Also for classical Chypre note fragrances, which is a combination of oak moss, cedar, and labdanum. You could also see the beautiful cedar note in the fragrance. Also, when talking about my probably most favorite fragrances, which is the Eisenberg Oriental fragrance, the Oriental Rose Chypre. I don't know the specific name, but it's in their Oriental collection. The Chypre Rose scent also has the beautiful cedar note fragrance in it, and thus, of course, as it is more or less a natural origin scent note, it is more or less also high quality wise. But also talking about other perfume notes in the woody category, there are also less well-known ones, such as the bamboo note. In some niche fragrances you will see it. Also bark notes. Of course, bark itself could be a different origin, but also this could be technically distinctively noted as a separate note, even though, of course, the wood origin itself rather and the wood type would be, tree type would be more important. And apple tree, almond tree, so different fruit trees, some branches with fruits also could be determined as a separate fragrance note if they are distinctive enough scent profile wise. Birch, beech, spruce or black spruce, Buddha wood, which is very more or less rare plant, coconut tree, cypress, fig tree in Mediterranean perfumes is something also pretty unique. Also different oud types, for example, Laotian nudes, oud fragrance from Laos. Mahogany, of course, you might be familiar with the scent of mahogany wood from which was something very popular back in the day. Mahogany tables, a beautiful dark wood table, but of course, mahogany wood itself could also be considered as a separate fragrance note in the woody category. Palo verde tree. Plum tree in the fruit tree section or selection. Pine, of course, the pine essence itself is used as a medicinal quality, but also in fragrances you can also see this, especially in male fragrances. Sandalwood, sandal Mysore is also one of the most expensive trees, along with oud. Oud fragrance notes because the Mysore sandalwood and classical oud wood as an ingredient is extremely expensive. It's one of the most expensive ingredients of fragrances in the world. And of course, some of these ingredients can be also and have been also used in multiple locations, for example, in Arab countries or Italy or some other locations as incense. And also as oil fragrance, not just for the body, but also for religious purposes or for burning at home, in temples, and so forth. And also more interesting woody fragrances, for example, spruce, red willow, and so forth, are also less seen in the fragrance notes, but also, of course, it depends on the fragrance where you will be able to see this particular scent note, especially in niche fragrances. And of course, Palo Santo, which is also traditionally used in both religious and ethnic activities for burning as an incense, and also papyrus, which, for example, in Lancome fragrance Trésor Nuit, you will see the particular papyrus note as a prominent note in the basis of the scent. Together with strawberry note and woody notes, other woody notes, and that would thus create this beautiful, unique fragrance. But of course, when looking at the specific woody fragrances, it is important to note the manufacturer and also manufacturing country, because sometimes formulations in different locations, for example, third countries such as US compared to EU countries, would be different due to HISIPCA regulations and also due to other restrictions, for example, in regards to ingredient for fragrance importation, either banning specific ingredients, ingredient prices, different bans due to some state sanctions and so forth, that could also limit the specific accessibility or increase excessively the price of the fragrance ingredient, and thus would be sourced from a different location or replaced by a synthetic ingredient. And also, for example, when looking at the cheaper fragrances, of course, you won't get the sandal Mysore, the original woody ingredient from the actual tree, and rather it would be replaced by synthetic alternative due to price, because of course original sandal Mysore would be extremely expensive, and thus only pretty expensive niche quality fragrances will actually have the original ingredient. Which is the same for different vanilla. Tahitian vanilla, for example, will be more expensive. And also, when looking at designer scents, typically the designer lines, I'm not talking about the niche quality, limited edition, or very expensive designer fragrances, because of course Armani and different fragrance companies and designer scent companies such as Dior also have limited edition more expensive fragrances that could actually have the original ingredients in it or the top quality ingredients in them. But I'm talking about more accessible, widely available ones that you can see in every fragrance store, and of course those will either contain just a small quantity of the original ingredient or synthetic alternative, and it's just a normal thing because it's not possible to manufacture for reasonable cost expensive, very limited edition, exclusive fragrance ingredients, because then the fragrance would be way more expensive. And also, when looking at different time periods, for example, in 80s, 90s, you would see a lot of natural ingredients, up till nowadays, when they were overall over the past few decades replaced by synthetic ingredients, thus resulting in the fact that the fragrance's longevity and sillage is lesser, and at the same time, the outcome is that, of course, the scent profile shifts. For example, for a Dior fragrance, Dior Poison that has been manufactured, let's say, in 80s, 90s, compared to a recent edition of the same fragrance. And thus, for example, the EDP in 80s fragrances quite often will be far more concentrated in reality and more long-lasting and richer in scent profile than compared with the same fragrance nowadays, as of course both the scent style has shifted to more lighter one, as those days also, for example, the cultural differences and lifestyle differences, for example, allowed also smoking indoors quite frequently, let's say in office environment or in public setting, cafes, and thus the fragrance was created in a way that it would withstand also different other environmental impact nuances, for example, smoking inside of the premises, so on and so forth. Well, these days, more lighter fragrances are preferred. They are less sillage-wise, unless, of course, we're talking about more niche quality scents that are not in the large trendy group. And also at the same time, longevity would be much less. For example, back in the day, Dior Poison would last days on the skin, while nowadays it would just last maybe 8 hours max. And this also means that if you can, it's always amazing to resource some vintage scents, and if especially you can get some online purchased fragrances in online stores that are still sealed. But of course, these will be very expensive and collector's quality typically. And it is possible that vintage scents will have top notes or some other specific notes either shifted, disappeared in the scent profile and scent pyramid, or altered due to aging. Some of the fragrances also in woody category also ages. For example, oud fragrances can darken over time and, well, let's say mature. Some people prefer it and some don't. Thus the scent profile shifts to richer, but for example, for white florals and more lighter fragrance notes in the top profile, these might completely disappear, turn sour, and so on. And this is also something to take into account. So that's all for today. Bye.